Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Shift. We took a little break now, and we're back once again for a weekly live stream series from the Story of Stuff project. I'm Jericho Apple, the project's digital strategist, and today I'm joined by photojournalist and founder of Shoot for Change, Timothy Bouldry. We'll be talking about how a person from New Hampshire, Tim, found and followed his purpose, and by doing so, ended up in places like Nicaragua, Syria, and Venezuela, telling the stories of communities who live near dump sites. This is a special episode because later on, Tim will be providing commentary behind his photos, so stay tuned. But first, a word about the shift. The coronavirus pandemic is forcing all of us to answer some of the toughest questions about how our society and system works, from how well we share resources to how resilient our communities are. But could this crisis actually be an opportunity to invest in an economy that works for people and the planet? What if we could come out on the other side more resilient than before? We started the shift to talk with the thinkers and doers shaping how we're seeing and reacting to the pandemic and what comes after. So let's get to it. There's a common saying that a picture is worth a thousand words. Well, picture this. Imagine living near a vast area of mountains and valleys. But instead of the Sierras and fresh air, you're greeted with mountains of trash as far as your eye can see, and smoke filling your lungs from waste being burnt. That is the site at La Chureca, located in Managua, Nicaragua. Nicknamed the City of Trash, La Chureca was the largest open-air landfill in Central America, covering 7 square kilometers. Roughly 1,000 people live and work on the dump site, making a living by sorting recyclable waste. And get this, half of the people who live in this dump site are children under the age of 18. La Chureca is one dump site among the many scattered all over the world, some of which you see on your screen. Today, I'm joined by Timothy Bouldry, someone with first-hand experience of living in places like La Chureca. Through his nonprofit Shoot for Change, Tim explores and educates people about open dump site activity and the communities living in them. Tim, thank you for joining us. How are you doing? Looks like we had some issues with the audio. You doing well, Tim?
Yes, I'm doing great. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, great.
Tim, before we get started, first of all, how are you doing? We're in the middle of a global pandemic. How are you holding up?
I'm doing okay. Luckily, I'm here in New Hampshire in the house I grew up in. I came back from Nicaragua and I had a trip planned to the Philippines. And I used to live in New York City back in the day. So I'm really thinking about the people that I love in those areas because I feel a little bit more isolated in the forest here in New Hampshire.
Tim, today you're an established photojournalist who have traveled the world. You're also a founder of a nonprofit. Can you take us through what your life was like before you started your journey into photography and also activism?
I went to college for documentary photography, and I had a dream of moving to New York City. And so I moved to New York City, and you have to, live life and pay rent. And so I became a yoga teacher, which I love doing. I love teaching. I love yoga. So that was a great experience for 10 years. But then I started questioning, what am I going to do with the photography? And I didn't feel so connected as a journalist where I would take all these different stories and sell them. I felt, and so I started exploring, going to different countries and taking a look at different topics. And I eventually met these two boys in a small dump site, or big dump site in Nicaragua, and that's what changed my life. That's the thing that made me realize a premonition that I wanted to go in this direction and focus on nothing but the theme of waste and people living at these dump sites.
And that's why I'm so excited to have you on the show today because we talk about having a job, for example, which pays the bills, right? And you sometimes you have this passion and calling inside you saying, I want to do more. And today, people have more time than ever to self-reflect, find meaning in life. Can you kind of take us through, how you came about finding your passion? So you mentioned that there are there was these two boys that you met. What was the defining moment for you when you said, you know what, this is what I want to do, and I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to go for it.
I think there was a sort of an element of fear. I went to all these places that I was familiar with, or there wasn't anything that was I felt connected to. But I was really scared about this place that everyone told me about called La Chureca. And it was called the gates of hell. When you first walk in, you see all the smoke and the smog and the, you know, all the families living inside the trash. And at that time, it was very severe. Like, people were living directly in the trash, and there was no aid or help at that time, except for missionaries that might travel through. And it was that moment when I took the picture of the kids, and they lifted my fear off of me. Like, I felt like this is where I was supposed to be in this moment. And I wanted to take that back to the United States and show people. And so little by little, I started setting up booths and cafes, like with pictures and showing people, like, are you aware of this topic? Do you know what's happening here? And starting to think more about how we're connected to those people, and how products and the things that we're making and the decisions that we make connect us together at the same time. And it became a huge journey, because it wasn't just about poverty and humanitarianism. It was about environmental issues. I
Mhm.
went on to get a degree in environmental science, and it has to do with policy and government, and, you know, the municipality and the local region, and all. There's so much to learn from it that it took me to so many different countries, and I just kept asking questions and moving around.
Yeah, and your journey has taken you all over the world. You've taken some of the most powerful photos I've personally seen, and I'm really excited to share this with everyone, really, because we're really going to start going into storytelling mode here, and Tim's going to start taking us with the photos, just like you see on his background, and kind of going behind the lens. How does that sound with you, Tim?
It sounds great. I love it.
Awesome. So we're going to load up our first photo here. Tim, can you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at?
This was taken in Guatemala City, in Zone 3. And what you're looking at is all trash, and the black dots are all vultures. And you can't see them well with the pixelation on the website. But if you look very closely, you'll see people that are all working. You'll see like a truck in there. And I took this picture from a cliff. And at the cliff, there's a cemetery. And so from my perspective, I'm trying to fit as much of the dump site into the picture as possible, which I can't. And I would have to take a panoramic perspective of the dump site.
Mhm.
There's a lot of torrential rains, it loosens up the soil and the trash, and there's a river that runs alongside this dump site. And you can't see it, but there's like a cliff of trash on the top right corner of the image, where the river runs alongside, like on the other side of that steep, uh, you know, hill in that
Cliff.
area.
Mhm.
And so, when there's a lot of torrential rain, the cemetery starts to break up and fall into the dump site, and people start going and scavenging through the tombs as well as the trash, looking for valuables. And this also creates a lot of sinkholes. It can swallow up people, and it has swallowed up trucks. And I'm not making this up. Like, you can Google it and look. Amazing short documentary about it with some great drone footage to give you
Mhm.
some really wonderful perspective. And it's massive, and I find it to be very toxic and very destructive. So what I
Yeah.
did was, I saw that river, and I said, where's that river flowing to? So I found someone that knew where, and we took a drive. It was about 5 miles, like a half an hour of driving in that terrain. And if you flip to the next picture, this is a place called Chinlautla, and it's further away from Zone 3, but the trash is still flowing in abundance in that area. and people are still going into the river to collect recyclables to sell. And the smell is horrific as well. So every time there's a lot of torrential rain, this trash gets mixed up with the local water stream. And in a lot of areas in Guatemala, people can't drink the local water. So instead of that, they're recycling bottles to get money to buy bottled water so they can have a safe water source to drink from, which just sounds like a downward spiral in terms of recycling.
Right. And that's also I imagine it's in a plastic bottle as well, right? The water they're drinking out of.
Yes, definitely the most common inexpensive bottled water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's almost like a loop that doesn't end, because that plastic bottle will likely end up in the landfill. So it's a cycle.
Yep, or they'll just recycle it directly, but still it's such a dependency on the economy attached to this, but also where does all of this trash come from? And that's one of the things I started to look at, was picking up the trash and really looking at it at a close level. Because when I photograph trash, how many ways can I photograph trash, and how many ways can I make it look interesting? And I tried showing the reality. I tried showing more positivity in it. I try to show all the different sides and try to give a true, honest perspective on it. And then I started observing a little bit more closely, where is the trash coming from, and where is it going. So I've noticed different results in different places, but it wasn't a study I did from the very beginning, because I've been photographing trash now for about 11 years. And, I obviously see a lot of American-based brands in the trash and making it to dump sites in other people's backyard, whether it was bought there or if it was delivered there.
How is it exactly ending up in these landfills? We're talking about Nicaragua, which is in South America, right? But how is it exactly ending up from my backyard here in California to Nicaragua?
Right. In Central America, well, in those places, I see more of the trash like coming from maybe like El Salvador or like a neighboring country. And I do see I see American brands like Coca-Cola, but it'll be a Coca-Cola bottle that was produced, maybe in Mexico or somewhere a little bit more local. But there's still a crossover between these countries. What is being created, what is being exported, what is being bought, what is being used, thrown out, and then resold again, and where does that go? And so the circularity of all this waste is just completely, it's trackable, I think, in practically every direction. And even the recent stories of the trash that people are paying to have recycled, say from California, ends up in the backyards, people in Indonesia or even Malaysia, after, especially when China stopped accepting trash that was coming in. So we're like supposed to be recycling trash, but then a portion of that gets into other trash that we don't want to deal with. We have too much of a capacity for. We send it to someone else, whoever's willing to take it. They stop accepting it. It goes to another country. It gets accepted by people that don't have the correct license to be contracting that type of trash, and then it ends up in someone else's backyard.
Right. Yeah, and where do you draw the line, right? So China closes their shores from accepting externalized waste. Well, now it's just going to trickle down to other countries that are not as developed as China, who has been living off of this economy that it's created. So prevention. How do we prevent the trash from being created in the first place? And by the way, the first photo you showed, for people who didn't see that, there's a giant construction vehicle at the top of that, just to give you a scale of how massive this landfill is. And at the end of this video, as well as in the comments, we'll share Tim's website, so we can go directly on his website where all his photos are. We're gonna load up the next photo here. What are we looking at here, Tim?
Okay, so I took this photo in a place called Nueva Vida, which is Spanish for new life in Ciudad Sedino, Nicaragua. And I know these kids. I actually, when I left New York City in 2015 in January, I rented a small house that was right next to this dump site. So I'm familiar with this place. I had a unique access to it because I could walk over there during the day, at night, and I could wait for the right moments to take the right kind of pictures. The girl in the yellow, her name is Josefina, and I'm very close to her family. And what is the common story to Nueva Vida is,
Sorry, Tim. Seems like you're having audio problems. Okay, I think I can hear you again.
okay, the
Okay.
story, okay, the story about Nueva Vida is that there was Hurricane Mitch in the 90s, and that wiped out a lot of the communities. And the government response, I've noticed during hurricanes and torrential rains, is to move the community towards trash. It's happened with Hurricane Mitch, and it also happened with when there was flooding throughout the Manchester section of Managua Lake. They took those people out and they moved them next to La Chureca. So what always happens in a situation like that is people that are already poor are being removed, placed next to a dump site without many resources, and then start becoming dependent on the dump site. So in those early years, my observation was more about natural disasters making people migrate towards dump sites, and even how the government reacts to situations like that, even moving them to areas where they kind of stay suppressed. And that's what is this photograph means that to me when I look at it and remembering
Yeah.
everything in Nueva Vida.
Yeah. What are they sitting in right now? Is this like a refrigerator?
Yeah, this is like it's either a refrigerator or it's like a freezer that you open up from the, and it's the installation inside.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
I found a lot of interesting things because people don't just recycle, they also repurpose. So they might take an object like this and convert it into a closet or a storage space.
Mm-hmm.
They might also like burn a mattress and then use the wire in the mattress for a fence around the house. I've seen people use a fan and they take the front of the fan off,
Yeah.
and they use that as a grill and they cook meat on top of that. And I've seen people repurpose other objects in very creative ways.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, and I can't imagine that, these are up to, health and safety standards when they're burning things and when they're trying to repurpose stuff.
Well, just even in that material, like especially in furniture, you have as a PCBs that that
Mm-hmm.
all those toxins and chemicals are released every time you're burning
Right.
synthetic materials, and especially in areas, there's regulations in developed countries, but undeveloped countries have no regulations on those type
Right.
of things. In the background, you can see a tire burning.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they're burning a tire just to get to the metal wire to recycle the wire. So that's a lot of carbon emission, and just direct uh, smoke and black smoke that everyone's breathing in just so that someone can get to some pieces of metal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, so in La Chureca, there are over 400 families that live there, right? And half are under the age of 18. And this is just one dump site out of the many that exist all over the world. So in normal circumstances, people who live there, just like in this photo, they face incredibly difficult living conditions.
Mm.
Can you describe these today, like the ones in La Chureca, especially with a pandemic? How are they dealing with this?
Well, one of the reasons why I always went back is to follow the stories of what would happen environmentally, what would happen with projects in these places, and what would happen to the families and the people. And
Hmm.
so that when I become a lot older, and that's sort of something that I've recorded throughout my whole life so that I could share. And so the beginning conditions that I've seen are different now than they were then. And it really depends on the country and what type of aid and help they've received. So, let's say La Chureca in the 1990s, and, into the 2000s, it was severe pollution, large family count, living inside a mountain of trash that's burning, people not really so much recycling for money, but just looking for food to eat directly. I've seen large, um, like a truck, take a bunch of meat and just dump it, like meat that other people don't want from a restaurant, and then people go and pick out of there, and
Oh,
they'll cook.
sorry, Tim. Lost you after the restaurant there. Sorry about the audio issues.
Oh, it's okay. Um, like restaurants might dump food there, and then the people will take food from the trash directly. Um, in the situation with La Chureca, they had the AACID, which is from the Spanish government that provided a bunch of homes and housing. So they created a wall in a community. So these people now live in an area that's a more dignified expression of a community with homes. But it's still, it's dirty. It's people have converted their homes into little sorting factories and sorting plants, and there's still the drugs. There's still, a lot of other things going on in the neighborhood, but it's a lot more dignified, and it's a lot better environment than it used to be. The problem is that there's so many people living there, there's not enough work at the sorting plant, and people just keep going back to the dump to recycle informally anyway. And now that we have the pandemic, it just becomes kind of a petri dish for the COVID-19. And I had spoken to you last week, and you had asked me about that. And I had mentioned that the government was suppressing the concept and the idea of it, and told everyone to go on with their regular lives. And Nicaraguans, the ones that were a little bit more, that don't listen to the government as much and a little bit more aware of things going on in the world, did their own quarantine process and their own, physical distancing. But now it's turning into a problem. This week, our tutor in our educational program is ill. The director of the school, a bunch of the kids are ill. The husband of the director is in the hospital. So now, just this week, we're getting a lot of information about people getting sick. And I just even read in the Washington Post that they're having express burials. So the government, it appears that the government is trying to cover up what's happening, with the decision of not accepting the idea of the COVID, spreading around, and now people are dying at a rate that's larger than before, and at a rate that they don't have the capacity for it, and they're taking the people and they're burying them immediately.
Oh. If we kind of zoom out a little bit here and talk a little bit about your personal story. Thank you, by the way, for sharing your photos. Really exciting stuff. Again, we'll link that down in the comments. So you've seen and experienced how living in a dump site affects people and their families, including yourself. I want to ask, how do you cope with the personal stress of your work? And also, how do we even begin to address the problems of the excessive waste that the world produces?
Well, I had moved from New York to Nicaragua and with very little Spanish, and I lived next to a dump site, and smoke that would come from that dump site would come into my house and on the floor. The pollution was just so direct, and so I learned a lot through that process. I learned how to take better care of myself in my health. And then just in 2018, we had a little civil war, and I was running around the country for a little bit. You know, there was people fighting in the streets and blocking the streets, and uh, it's a whole other topic. But to deal with the stress of being a foreigner and then trying to give aid in a country where the government doesn't really want you there has been a struggle. So I always had to kind of step back, take care of myself, and then go back in again. And a lot of my work is connected, I think, from doing yoga from my New York days, and now I sort of feel like it's bringing me back to yoga more to take care of myself. The better I can take care of myself, the more I can help other people. And I've
Right.
experienced, you know, parasites and bacteria. I've had a virus. All these things were directly linked to the environment that I was working in.
Mm-hmm.
And so after that civil war, I kind of transitioned
Oh,
back.
sorry, losing your audio.
I,
Um, After that, gotcha. And after that,
After that, I transitioned back to living in New Hampshire, and then that became my new obstacle. My new obstacle was, how can I work remotely? And so I learned how to operate a program in Nicaragua and in 5 other countries from New Hampshire.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the waste, when I go into these situations, I try to look at everything as objective as I can.
Right.
Um, I'm not that person living there. It's not my country. I'm not under that government. I don't, these concepts are foreign to me. So I try to learn from everyone that I talk to in every situation I'm in. I try to be as compassionate as I can in all the different decisions people make and the position that they have politically, whether you know it's about waste directly or if it's about something different than that, the humanitarian level. So I try to show everything objectively with my photographs, and then just say, well, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's I have an opinion, but my photographs are not opinionated. You know, I try to show people something that they can learn from just by seeing it, and I
Mm-hmm.
try to show it from different sides and different angles. So you'd have to see like my website to get a bigger, broader picture of what I do.
Right. And let's talk about a little about your nonprofit. Can you tell us about Shoot for Change?
So going to different countries and photographing waste, it inspired me to start my own nonprofit called Shoot for Change. And the concept with Shoot for Change is basically photographing environmental and humanitarian injustices and just sharing them and campaigning about to other people about awareness. It's basically an awareness campaign. And then
Mm-hmm.
from there, people can learn from it and decide if they want to do something to help towards the cause. And so from there, um, I was able to start the East West Scholarship Program. And so now I have a scholarship program that helps 80 kids in different countries, and every age group in all these different dump sites.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For those who don't know what ISWA is, that's International Solid Waste Association. Um, and Tim is the program director for the scholarship program there. Tim, can you explain a little more about how you're directly impacting the lives of the children that are living near the dump sites through this scholarship program?
So when I was living in Nicaragua, the first couple of years was kind of like a troubleshoot, try to understand am I doing here exactly? I didn't have like a perfect plan. I
Mm-hmm.
just like sold everything I had in New York and just moved there. And I had a couple of months to figure it out before I ran out of money. And luckily it's very affordable to be there. So we did like gardening projects. I taught yoga, I taught
Mm-hmm.
English. um, I would see like what the kids would know about and not know about in terms of their own historical sites, visit volcanoes, But it wasn't until later that I got picked up by ISWA, and the EPA actually invited me to a congress in Vancouver, where I started presenting my photographs. And at these congresses, you have people from the government and the mayor's office and these, high profile professional people in the field. And then there was just me that took a bunch of pictures in the dump site. But what I learned is that a lot of those people never been to a dump site before. And even though they know a lot about policy and a lot of the lawmaking and regulations and the graphs and the statistics, a lot of them didn't know a lot about the true personal side of it and the experience of being there firsthand. So that was when I realized, okay, I do fit at this table with everybody else. And we all started sharing information with one another. And eventually that turned into presentations, and presentations turned into grants, and grants turned into the opportunity of, well, if we gave you, a grant, what would you do with that in Nicaragua? And after all of the gardening and doing all these other things, I realized education would be the best opportunity.
Sorry about the audio. I heard you on the gardening.
Yeah, after gardening and trying all these other smaller projects, I thought the best investment for the kids in the community would be education.
Nice.
A lot of those kids and the families believe that education is only for people with money. And if they have no money, there's no purpose for any education. So at the least, if I can put them through a school system and they can grow a little bit of confidence or get a little, at least take them physically out of that environment and into an environment that's making them think more and study and build some discipline, then that's an experience that they would never have before. And I think time and experience is so valuable for everybody.
Well said. Tim, you're doing incredibly inspiring and impactful work. I really want to end, but kind of going back to your personal story. So you took a risk by leaving the US, traveled the world to follow your passion, leaving money behind. So today, people are sheltering in place. They have the space to reflect, think about their values in life, their life goals, what their next steps are going to be after the pandemic, after shelter in place or quarantines are lifted. If you could offer your advice to someone who wants to pursue a life of purpose and fulfillment, what would it be?
That don't stop at anything and do it. If you don't know the language, you don't know the country. People told me in New York, you're going to get yourself killed out there, and every day was like a new lesson. I take my car out, I get a flat tire. The police are trying to extort money out of me. Like every day was a new lesson to learn in Spanish. And so I took every step, every little, and if I can do that, I think anybody could probably do it better than me. So don't stop at nothing. If you have a feeling in your heart, then you have to follow it. If you follow your heart, everyone else is going to listen to you and follow you too.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tim. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. How can people get in touch with you and support what you're doing?
You can go to my website, bouldry.com, Bouldry. The ISWA Scholarship Program is at ISWA Kids, ISWA-kids.com. You can email me at shoot4change@yahoo.com, all spelled out, and I'll reply.
Thank you, Tim. And those websites will also be listed below in our show notes. Thank you to the viewers for joining us as well. If you enjoy the show, well, hey, let us know in the comments. The world needs love right now. So like, comment, share, spread the positivity. Hit us up on social at Story of Stuff and visit storyofstuff.org to check out what else we're up to. That is the show for today. We'll be back next week. My name is Jericho Appel, and thank you for joining The Shift.